There we are. Okay. How are you doing?
Perfect. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. Was you wrote something. It's kind of long. The 40,000 pages on Warhammer 40,000.
I did. I really enjoyed doing it as well.
It's fun. It's
It's
great. It's huge
it's
though.
kind of timely. It's kind of timely actually because there's currently a drama going around at the moment because Games Workshop came out and said, yeah, the Space Marines are male and male only, and they're really mad about it. Really mad about it. But
Who would be mad about that? Elliot
well,
Page?
exactly. Who would be mad about that except if you're a complete lunatic? And you should see their responses. I mean, they're just so angry that it's like, well, you just can't have female space marines. So, well, who cares, you know? But it's once more in the law, and I explained in the essay why. Obviously, like Games Workshop doesn't have a choice. If they want to maintain their IP and their fan base, then they kind of have to do this. And so you can tell they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Cool.
How are things going with you, by the way? Everything all right?
Well, I'm getting over COVID, so I'm kind of like
God.
numb. Have you ever had it before?
Oh yeah, I've had it a few times.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just feel weird.
Really? I didn't get any of that. For me, it was just a sort of heavy cold or heavy flu.
Yeah. No, like loss of sensation or taste or
I mean,
brain
I lost
function?
my sense of smell,
Yeah.
and taste,
Yeah.
but I didn't lose any other, any critical faculties sort of thing.
Yeah. You got a lot riding on those critical faculties.
I know. I do. Now you say that. Christ, I'm even worried about it.
No, well, I watched your I watched this weekend. I watched your talk with Aaron McIntyre.
Oh yeah.
It was wonderful. Like that's some of like the best, clearest reasoning that I've heard from you. Like you're really like
Thank
on
you.
top of your game. It was really enjoyable to
I
watch that.
presented those arguments to Adam and Sitch. They basically didn't really want to hear them, and it was like, look, I want liberalism too,
Yeah,
but this is true. You've got to accept these are true. And so, not I think it's not next week, but the week after, we're going to be doing a stream on their channel on Tuesday talking about it. And that's the reason I wrote that, is so I could clearly elucidate to them, like, in black and white, look, this is why we're getting fucked, basically, by the critical race
liberals.
theorists.
Yeah,
Yeah, liberals are getting fucked by the communists because the communists have been working on these flaws for a very long time.
Yeah.
And you'll notice all of the communist flaws, all of the communist demands are extensions of the flaws that the liberals have assumed, equality, universalism, things like this. And it's just like, look,
Yeah.
these are the reasons. Essentially, they're being honest
and
about
no,
the
and
lies
that happens
they've
on
told themselves.
that happens on every vector. Just within like I just cut off one little part of the culture war. I've been investigating that for years, which is the gender issue, and
Yeah.
it's so hard to get the liberal feminists or the gender critical radical feminists to understand that queer theorists have their ideas same. It's the same ideas. It's just
Yeah.
turned all the way up.
Yeah.
Trying to convince them of
Yeah.
that is a difficult process, though.
I've had a few people say, okay, so how do you replace these false assumptions? It's like, well, that's a good question, and it opens doors to conservatism, actually, because you have to accept that the conservatives have a point in many things. But we can talk about it on the stream if you want.
Yeah. Do we? We can just go. We're just going.
Yeah,
Well, it's not going to be streamed. It's just pre-recorded.
that's fine.
I'll post it afterwards. But some of those flaws, we don't have to completely go over what you spoke with Aaron about, but it's just really interesting because I'm trying to figure out, well, liberalism does have huge flaws. What is the antidote or the alternative? And it's like, well, there's this thing called conservatism. So how do we go into the right wing and be aware that there's flaws there too? Or I guess there's trade-offs maybe.
Yeah.
What are you giving up with regard to going from liberal to conservative? What are you giving up? Because there are a lot of strengths, and you detailed this and plenty of times. That's why you're probably still ascribe yourself to being classically liberal, because there's
do.
great things with liberalism, like there's open marketplace, efficiency, different ideas, different communities being able to engage without like the sword, right?
Like a free society is actually the desirable goal of liberalism, and also protection of the person, to have property rights in your own person, and to then have that extended to physical objects as property and have that protected. I've spoken to many of the chaps in the NRX, and a lot of them are actually quite nice, and they're not, terrible people, but they don't really want to accept that liberalism itself has its strengths, and they take advantage of these things. Like, a lot of them are sat in the houses they own. They aren't refugees in a different country, unlike Rousseau, Locke, and virtually, Marx, any of these radical thinkers in the pre-sort of liberal era. When they came up with their radical liberal ideas, they had to flee. Rousseau's books got burned. John Locke had to escape the country.
John Locke was forced out of England. I'm sorry to.
Oh yeah, he had to flee to Holland, and he came back for after the Glorious Revolution. He was a genuinely radical thinker in his time, and so the tolerance of liberalism to the marketplace of ideas is one of its genuine strengths, and we all take advantage of that.
Until we get to the problem of repressive tolerance and the Marxists taking over.
Yes, the Marxists have had a very long time to figure out what the problems with liberalism are and how they can beat it, and they're onto a winner at the moment, I'm loath to say. And so, essentially, the realistic liberal, the liberal who is still connected to the real world somewhat, has to accept that either they are going to commit to full communism or liberalism has to change. Now, on the plus side, liberalism is a flexible doctrine and has changed many times over the centuries. So I don't see why it can't change again. But the thing is, there are some core assumptions that I detail in the article that are not true, and replacing them does change liberalism into something else, although not something totally alien. The most important ones, though, are for example, the question of equality. Liberalism actually can overcome that. Liberalism really is for freedom, and the idea of freedom is, of course, antithetical to equality. If we're free, then we're different, as Solzhenitsyn puts it, and if we're equal, we're not free. But
in order to square that with the moral foundations theory of it's not fair. Like that, it's really not fair that some people are smarter than others, that some people are stronger than others. But the replacing fairness with some sort of upgraded Christian love where we're interdependent, where our inequality is where we derive value and interdependency. And if we replace that with fairness and equality, we get the state managing every interaction between human beings. Whereas if we have some sort of kind of love or like some idea that would be derived from Christianity about the divinity in each one of us and that appreciation, humility, that would overcome or balance out that unfairness that the Marxists take advantage of when they try to impose equity.
There is definitely something there, but I fear that we are too far beyond the power of religion to fix this. I don't see most people accepting religious tenets or foundations to any kind of ideological drive.
People are going to need values. Like, I don't understand. I know I was evoking Christianity there, but it's just like there's core concepts in there that are the values.
Yeah. The problem with liberalism is the use of the word equality. They shouldn't have used the word equality. Sameness of process is what the liberals should be arguing for, because that's really the spirit of what they meant. Everyone can be judged by the same laws, and that's what a law is, that everyone is judged by that law in that way, and the process is the same and fair to everyone. But they weren't really arguing for equality in the way that the modern communist would understand it. So equality, I think, is a word that the liberals should move away from and actually embrace difference, embrace freedom. Embrace
diversity.
Difference.
Be inclusive of diversity.
You could call it diversity, indeed. But you can emphasize that diversity is a product of freedom. It's not a product of equity. And this means that you have to be free, but you should be under the same process. The billionaire should be judged the same as the homeless person when it comes to following the law. We know that's an ideal that's never really going to be reached, but that's what we should be striving for regardless. So that's not too much of an issue, replacing the equality question. And the presupposition of the pre-social state of nature, it's a bit archaic now. Nobody cares We're way past that. I mean, when the United States was first being founded and populated by Europeans, that was a relevant thing to think about, but nobody thinks about that now. So
Well, yeah, but we think of, and it's the same thing. It's just upgraded. It's called the blank slate, is it not? It's just the same thing.
This is. It is. You are right there, of course, but it also bleeds into the question of the universal man.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that we need to think about, really, which is, and this is the hardest truth, I think, for liberals to accept, is that nobody is born outside of a time and a place. And so there is no universal man. Humans do have universal characteristics. The men go out and work, the women give birth and raise children. These are, generally universal human characteristics. But there is no universal man that can be derived from these universal similar characteristics and traits. And so we actually then, and the critical race theorists have done a very good job of actually hammering this home recently. For example, when they talk about anything, they'll say, when they talk about classical music, they have a habit of actually localizing it in space and time. They say, no, it's 19th century Northwestern European music. And that's true. That's an accurate thing. It is not just a universal music that all people in all times and all places can appreciate or have any kind of interaction with. And in a way, they're not wrong when they say, well, that means that the tribesman banging on a drum in Africa is just as valid. I mean, he might not have the technology, the tutoring, but from the perspective of the universe, if you're going to be truly universal, you're taking the perspective of the universe, which shows no preference or favor to any human that's ever lived and wouldn't care if they all died out tomorrow, then these are just as valid. And it's like, that is true. And so the question is, why would we take a universal perspective? When you think about it, it actually leads you down a weird path. It's like, why would we take a universal perspective?
Well, why did we? Why did we?
Because we had high-minded ideals.
Okay.
We had high-minded ideals, thinking we can have a solution for all mankind, and it seemed natural because at the time you've got to remember the liberals were coming out of very particular cultures where they were socially stratified, and this social stratification was theoretically underpinned by divine ordinance, and so it's very easy for a universal rhetoric about mankind to be used as a weapon to wield against that and say, no, look, it's not fair that the aristocracy is artificially, in many ways, oppressing the peasantry, especially as the thing that had justified the aristocracy's position in previous centuries, which was force, was actually not valid anymore with the ascent of the firearm and the massive armies of the Napoleonic era, for example. Actually, an aristocrat can't justify himself through his ability to defend the country because now it's the regular man defending the country in massed ranks of men with rifles. And so this leads you into, it very, very neatly dovetails with the idea, well, actually, this is a common humanity, isn't it? There's the special nature of the aristocrat has kind of been bled away by technological innovation and this new philosophy. And so it was very ascendant, and it was very powerful, and still to this day, it's very seductive. But it isn't true, and it is based on a falsehood. And so the question then is, okay, so if the critical race theorists are actually right to locate us in a time and place and culture and space, then what else follows from that? And what follows from that is that actually the peoples of the earth are different. Now, I'm not really talking in racial terms, although the first thing, especially... The first thing, it is true that genetically people are different, obviously, and it is true that there must be a genetic difference for people to have different skin tones or something like this, right? These all do stem from genetic differences, but the problem that people have is that there is a history in the West of that leading into moral judgments, and that's not really what the issue is about. The issue is actually about culture and the historical circumstances upon which a people, and by that I mean like an ethnos, as in Nigerians, Ugandans, Frenchmen, the English, the Americans, how these people step onto the world stage as people who have a self-identification as a shared ethnic group. Mm-hmm. And the historical process that produces these types of people is not something from which an individual can readily be detached. These people come with languages, customs, laws, institutions, and very particular historical memories. I mean, Jewish people are actually a great example of this because, of course, the most traumatic thing that could happen to a people has happened within living memory. And so you can see how this informs the way that Jewish people look at the world now. And, there are cynical people on the internet going, oh, well, they're just saying that everything's the new Hitler. And it's like, well, if you were in their position, that would be the thing that sprung to your mind too, right? So you can understand, like, this is the product of historical forces. And it turns out that everyone is the product of these historical forces and the institutions of the mold the character of the people. And so you end up with a bunch of base assumptions. And this is down to things you wouldn't even think of. Like, the type of language you use informs the way that you think. And it draws your focus onto certain things. Like there are languages in which there is almost no concept of an I separate to the local community. And in such languages, obviously, personal responsibility isn't one of the most important values. However, if you go to like a Protestant Northern European country, they're almost entirely focused on the individual and what the individual has within their powers. And, like English as a language in particular is very quick to place blame. It's very concerned about who can be held accountable. And it's that individual who will be held accountable. And as soon as you start thinking about it, you notice just how quickly the people around you will say, well, who did that? Who's responsible for that? And it's very, very quick, and it's embedded into the syntax of the language. And it much more so than like Southern Europeans, it's like that close, but that different. And then you look at like the family structures, like Northern Europeans, because of this very sort of self-sufficient mindset, have a very different worldview to the Mediterraneans, who've got very familial mindset. Like Italy is basically a thick tapestry of families that overlap, but England and Denmark and Scandinavia are totally different. The children are expected to move out, when they're like 19 or something, get their own job, get their own house, and then, form their own family. So you've got these very individuated family units, which is just totally different, just the Mediterraneans. So it's only a few hundred miles away, and the cultures are totally different. And so go to a culture on the other side of the earth, and you can see just how radically different the worldview of these people ends up being.
So the liberal assumption of universalism it's not totally incorrect. There are certain universals, let's say trade or math, let's say. Like there's certain universals, more or less, but like balance sheets and stuff like that. I guess that's an imperial imposition then. Well, trade is an imperial imposition. That's a universalizing.
There are things that are universally shared by humans, right? We all eat, we all sleep, we all drink, we all live, we all die. We used to all try to reproduce. There are universal aspects to being a human, but this, if you look in liberal theory, Locke, Rousseau, and they all do this with the pre-social man. They have to distill what man would have been like living outside of society, but there's never been a man who lived outside of society, at least not successfully. And so this person never really existed. And so it doesn't matter if there are some shared universal human characteristics. There's so much baggage piled on top of a person that is the product of hundreds, if not thousands of years of social development in a particular culture. That means that the person can never be separated from that culture. They'll always have those assumptions, and it is built into everything that they think. And it's not wrong that they do that. And this is the problem with liberalism. It acts as if there's something wrong with that, and in pre-liberal eras, no one questioned this. Everyone knew that, like, a Frenchman was different to a Zulu tribesman, and they would have different experiences. And in fact, one way that people used to identify each other from a moral perspective was by professing religion. Your religion determined your moral outlook. And so it used to be that calling yourself an atheist was, you may as well say, well, I kill babies, which incidentally is something we do these days. It was quite awful. You were not to be trusted. You couldn't be expected to uphold a contract, because you'd swear an oath before God. And this meant something, but now these things don't mean anything. But anyway, the point being, there was never a universal man. And so this means that we actually need to think of ourselves as particular people in a particular time, in a particular place with particular customs. And so, okay, what are our customs? And it turns out that liberalism is the abstracted doctrine of English political tradition. That's what we're dealing with. And that actually firmly grounds it in a particular place, particular time, particular people. And we can suddenly see why things are going so wrong. Because what is happening is the English political traditions that the American, or should I say the English founding fathers, very concretely tried to lay out from the doctrine inherited from Locke. Again, all English assumptions, very classically English. They are being overlaid with French assumptions. And these come from Rousseau. And the difference is that Locke believed in God. Rousseau believed in God as well, but Locke thought God was important. And so Locke, as all of the English Enlightenment thinkers thought, that our rights were imbued in us by our creator, by God. It's in your constitution. And so this was the source of rights, which meant rights were actually very determinate. We knew exactly what your rights were. However, and Locke, in his view, in the second treatise, he would say, well, we sacrifice a portion of our rights when we come together into a society. We sacrifice our right or freedom to be able to hurt another person or steal something they have, whatever. But in exchange, they forgo their right to be able to steal and hurt us. And so we come together into a sensible society. And you can see how you get the sort of hyper-libertarian, minimalistic, very people-focused government from the early founding of the Americas. We can say anything we like. We can do anything we like. We can own guns. We can, we can be crazy Americans, right? And it's like, yeah, that sounds great. And that's the logical endpoint of that. But Rousseau says, no, we don't do that. When we come into a society, what we do is we forfeit our natural rights. And in exchange, we get civil rights. And civil rights are underwritten by the state, which does, in fact, as the American boomers have a habit of saying, you're turning the state into God. Well, yes, it actually does, because the English assumption is that God exists and there's nothing we can do about that, and he gave us our rights, so the best we can do is deal with that. But Rousseau is saying, no, the state is now the originator of our rights, and therefore the state can underwrite everything we say. And so when they say healthcare is a human right, food is a human right, housing is a human right, things that are not intrinsic to your person are human rights. They actually mean they're civil rights that will be enforced by state power. But that, as again, the American Republicans are not shy to say, essentially the calculus of that is at the end of the final calculation is that it will be someone at a barrel of a gun pointing at the doctor saying, heal that man. And you see this in Cuba, places like this. This is the essential and concrete final endpoint of the French view of the social contract. And this, now we can see why America and the rest of the West, the English-speaking world, is going so far off the rails. It shouldn't be like this. We should be rejecting these French assumptions because we're not universal men. We are, in fact, Englishmen. All the English-speaking peoples are Englishmen. Shock and surprise,
Well, okay, so if we start with that and just reeling back just a little bit, those gun-toting crazy American libertarian, that I can do whatever I want, I can say whatever I want. What's being implied is that there's already a shared morality in my community. There's already that doesn't need to be explicated in the law. We already understand ourselves to have certain moralities. So by whatever I want doesn't mean whatever I want. It means within this assumption that we're kind of blind to.
It assumes you're Christians.
And that goes back to, I can't remember who said what to whom, but somebody said to one of our founding fathers, you created a republic, and the founding fathers, well, yeah, if you can keep it.
Yeah.
Like the entire Declaration and all of our founding documents assume a certain moral bearing, and that is cultural. What you're saying is that is cultural. So what is this American? What are the positive values? What are the assumptions of the American that are the anchor upon which freedom, the limited freedom that we actually do expect to have, rest and grow from? And if we can center that, which might be a conservative product or project, that might be what stands as opposed or in opposition to Marxism, which is making other assumptions about people not really having morality, just having drives and hungers that need to be sated. Like, I don't see a human being in Marxism. I just see units and organisms.
The class.
There. Yeah. the class.
The answer is Protestant values, and I specified Protestant values and not just Christian values because they're not the same. The Protestant values emphasize personal discipline, self-reliance, and good neighborliness. And these were, as you say, completely assumed by the founding fathers. They assumed that they would be good English Christians, Protestants, for all time. And they didn't think that this would change. And therefore, the social morality of the nation would be underwritten by this shared set of values. But of course, in the 20th century, as we can see, these have been rapidly undermined by a certain set of subversives that McCarthy was right about. And look at where we are now. And it looks like they're going to be very difficult to claw back, in my opinion.
But you said earlier that religious language isn't going to float it, but you still pine for that, or you still say, well, there was something there that we lost. How do you have those values without the story?
Well,
how do you communicate those to your child without, a Bible story? Like, is that not what these...
It's a great question. It's not necessarily that I'm pining for them, although I think in a way I probably am. It's the fact that this was the truth of it. This was the factual assumption that they had underpinned, as you said, that presupposes a lot. Yeah, it does. And it wasn't wrong for them to presuppose that either, because they were, an English-speaking Protestant country. So it wasn't wrong for them to presuppose that. And I did indeed say that I don't think religious arguments are going to be persuasive moving into the future. So that is, in fact, I think the core cusp of the point that we're at is, how do we recover these sort of traditional Protestant values without either appealing to things like race or religion? Race, obviously, no one wants to engage in racial politics, least of all me. But secondly, very few people want to engage in religious politics. And so how do we persuade people who are essentially generations of materialists who don't even understand transcendental ideals, like, true love? They're honestly watching Generation Z these days. I don't think they believe in any of these sort of fairy tales that I believed in when I was a kid. I think they've had this kind of cynically bred out of them by the millennials, actually. Watch millennial cartoons for children, and they are gross. They are absolutely gross. They are for adults, but they're being played to children, and they're totally cynical, they're morally flat. There's very little to them, and it's all underwritten by a deep irony that children don't understand, and so they are not able really to pass that this is not meant to be taken literally, and look at the values that are being indoctrinated into them. Whereas you compare the things that I was watching when I was a child, as commercialized as they may have been, they had unironic ideals in them. They were genuinely sincere in the ideals they were putting across. And you don't think about the effect that this has, but really I do think it's been piling up. And then when you combine that with the sort of cultural indoctrination and education that feminism has effectively put into the minds of young women, and then that sort of cascades down onto young men, you can see why you have a generation of OnlyFans now. The young women, and I hear this from young men so much, where they're saying, look, man, you being older than me were lucky enough to come from a generation where you didn't have these problems. And so you have a wife, you have a child, 2 children, 3 children, and you've got all these things sorted. But I can't get a wife because all of the women I interact with in my age bracket basically view me as a walking wallet. I am a transaction to them. That's all they see me as. They can't fall in love because they are convinced they live in an evil patriarchy, and the best you can do is essentially extract resources from a man. Now, I'm not saying that every woman is like this, but I think that they are speaking to a real phenomenon, that there is a preponderance of women like this. There's a large number of them, and it's actually making dating very difficult for them. And I can imagine that online dating has made things even worse, especially for people who have never not had a mobile phone. And so I'm not surprised you get like the incel phenomenon, like Nick Fuentes coming up, openly being proud of the fact. So what, Nick Fuentes?
Yeah, just a weird mix of hyper-conservative repression of sexuality. It's just like, whoa.
What is he arguing for? And things, I don't even dislike Nick Fuentes. He is actually a funny guy to listen to. I've watched a few of his shows and a few of his clips. He can talk. He's entertaining. I don't dislike him, but it's like he is so far off base as to providing a structure for young men to try and engage with the world. But the thing is, I think he's probably essentially a rational response to the circumstances in which young men find themselves.
Okay.
Like, they don't have the opportunities that people of our age had when we were young, because women hadn't essentially been like, stripped of the romance of being a woman, whereas now it's very difficult to see and find young women who think femininity is positive. And you see actual femininity bloggers these days, like Ben Shapiro's sister, Abby Shapiro, is one of them. They're actually quite few and far between, and you can point them out and say, look, here's an unusual woman on the internet who's saying that actually maybe the magic of womanness and womanliness is something worth pursuing.
Honoring.
Absolutely. It's something that every woman in her grandmother's generation would have intrinsically understood, and every woman would have done it. But now it's a rarity, and I can see where the young men are coming from, being like, look, I can't find that wife.
Well,
I just can't do it.
The problem being that if we're in a I don't know if society's falling apart or not, but there's a lot of advancements towards decadence, and the structures, while it's falling apart in a moral sense, it's also encroaching more and more into every aspect of our lives. And so how do you build a structure, a moral foundation structure, during a time of incredible encroachment of this structure, this bureaucratic amoeba, this Cthulhu, and also this decadence too that's stripping people of their value? So you said that men are reaching out and talking to you. What are they looking for? And is that not some form of conservatism or some sort of just explicit values, like a code of ethics?
Without a doubt, there's no question that many young men feel untethered from anything that feels real, and that feels that and the worst thing for young men is to not have order and structure. This is why I think, and I'm convinced of this, that young men who grow up without fathers tend to become delinquent. This is the reason for delinquency, because I think that there's some ancient primal evolutionary reason that men respond to violence, and so the father being in the house is essentially the authority on violence in the house. And every young man knows this. That if they step out of line too far, their father is going to beat their ass, and rightfully so, and that's how they keep themselves in line. They're actually not very rational creatures, young men, and actually it turns out that men generally are not terribly rational, but then neither are women, so it's not like there's any fingers should be pointed between the sexes. It's people in general are actually not thoroughly rational.
Well, yeah, and the way that we inculcate good behavior is different between men and women. That's one argument that I'm trying to make for gender. Gender is a code of ethics to regulate the different drives and natures of the sexes, and Absolutely. It can be less or more restrictive, but you're going to need that. You're going to want to restrain the men. You're going to want to restrain the women too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually been working on a sort of thick definition of woman recently. And,
with two C's or C and a K?
With two C's. Because there was a philosopher called Bernard Williams, and he was saying, well, look, some language is what he called thick concepts. He spelled it with a CK, but I think it's better with a CC. And these concepts are multi-layered. For example, the word betrayal. Betrayal describes an act, it describes two people, and it describes a moral judgment all in one word. And you can't separate this concept out and still have the concept of betrayal there. You can't subtract these elements and still have the concept of betrayal. You have something else. And it turns out that a lot of our language is inherently descriptive and normative. So it describes something and it makes a judgment about that thing. And we have this all the time. Heroic, glorious, deception, things like this. It describes a thing that's happened and it judges it. And gender roles, like you say, are exactly the same. The term woman comes with it. In one layer of it is a biological description, another is a social description, and another is a normative ethical demand. Yeah. And it's a demand for men and women, how we can live together in a shared society and all feel comfortable and have boundaries respected and things like that. And
also produce more society too.
Exactly. How the society can be safe, harmonious, and self-generative. Yeah. And as you say, it contains a code of ethics. And this is important. And it has to be understood that for men, violence is a part of that. It's just a fact of life that is, young men are physical beings. They're very aware of their physicality. I mean, my sons love play fighting. They love it more than anything. Like, in fact, a friend of mine, well, a subscriber of us, made me and my oldest, my 7-year-old, he's nearly 8, these wooden swords so we could sword fight.
Oh,
right?
no.
And my 18-month-old, we're in the garden literally this afternoon. My 18-month-old is wandering around, and me and my son are doing a bit of sword fighting. And as soon as he sees it, you should see his face light up. He's just watching a sword fight. He's giggling, he's laughing, and he comes over and he wants to be a part of it. It's like, I mean, he's there playing with the bicycle wheel that's laying on the ground, so he's being very boyish anyway. But as soon as he sees us fighting, he is in rap. He's giggling, he's laughing, like he's watching the funniest thing in the world. He loves it, and it's like, that's a boy thing. This is very much a boy thing, and you've got to accept that this is what men are like, and we need to be able to have something in society that caters to that. Because as Christina Hoff Sommers says, the education system and the society we live in at the moment treats boys like defective girls. And it's like, they're not. They're just different. And it's okay that they're different.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And informing that, and I think that a lot of young women, there are currents within womanhood or the woman side of the world where women are looking for some sort of traditional values too. And there's a growing movement of post-liberal feminists too, or even post-feminist women that are saying we lost something. We took all these liberal assumptions, but that stripped us of even the idea of the individual doesn't make sense when you think of a mother and a child or a pregnant woman. There's no two individuals there. It's a dyad. It's two in one. It's a mystery. The male mind or the liberal thought process doesn't at all look at the beginning and end of life. It has no room for care. And then you have Marxism coming in here with this weird kind of inverted kind of care where you have this mother state and where everything's about fairness and care and harm reduction and stuff. So you have this kind of this reassertion of that feminine value that was kind of cut out or left out of the liberal thought experiment. And I think that women are understanding that that's something that they want to be able to explicate and share amongst each other, and then also share with men so that men can understand them, respect them, honor them, and then do what we need to do in order to support that.
Have you ever noticed how properly managed femininity is like a spell? It's like an enchantment. When you have a woman who is in command of her femininity and is womanly, has that kind of and it's a lot of small things that are packaged up, but it's the way they present themselves, like their nails are done properly, their hair is done properly, maybe they're wearing perfume, but they're wearing very feminine clothes, and they comport themselves in a certain way. Then you can see the room bending around them. You can see everything, like like there's an attractive force that bends everything to their attention, and so they're in command of everything around them. And it's like, but what have they even done here? What have they done? But there's something magnetic and magical about this kind of spell that women can cast on men. Mm-hmm. And this is what every woman's grandmother knew. This is what was handed down from generation to generation of young women saying, look, act in this certain way and men will be falling at your feet at all times and all places. And you can see 100 years later, as you say, the sort of post-liberal world we've arrived in, where women are now just lumps of flesh equal to that of men, reduced to that of men. And it's like, okay, but no one needs to do anything for you anymore because we're just equals. And if we're equals, I'm not doing anything for that guy over there. I'm certainly not doing anything for you. There's nothing special about you either. And so you can see how the disenchantment of the world has been successful. But who did that benefit? Who was that good for?
1% of OnlyFans, the ones who are making $100,000 a month.
Right. But even then, is it even good for them? Because one of the things you notice, there are you can find lots of articles of very beautiful women saying, I can't get a date because of my OnlyFans. Like, no man will date me because I have OnlyFans. It's like, well, what did you think? Did you think you could just get loads of money and replace your need for a loving relationship with your OnlyFans? And because that's where you are now, and who knows if it can ever be undone. And that's the top 1% of women. That's the most attractive women who will ever live, who are now multi-millionaires and have their own giant empty mansions as they sit around going, why does no one love me? you know. Whereas, but the thing is, I think that this, if you look at the feminist academics who were part of bringing all of this about, one thing one notices is they lacked feminine mystique. One can't help but notice that these women look as though they're actually very jealous of the regular woman who has a bit of feminine mystique, who knows how to play the game somewhat, so she can get a husband, so she can have kids, so she can find herself in a loving relationship. Well, a lot of these women didn't have that, and it's like,
Well,
really
there is a politic of resentment around that. That's very, it's very subtle. It's like whenever I speak with women on my show, well, I do a lot of interviews with women. If I happen to accidentally compliment a woman, I'll get a lot of flack from other women being offended on behalf of the woman I'm complimenting. Like, you have a nice accent, or your poise is excellent. You have a wonderful way of presenting yourself. That's seen as me reducing that woman. There's something about that femininity that's discouraged, or you're not supposed to notice it. If a man notices it, you're evaluating this woman based on this thing called mystique, which is not really evaluating her according to her intelligence or what she does in the world, but rather her mere accidental femininity. Like, it seems like femininity, as you describe it, is kind of a slight to some women.
Yeah.
It seems like they see that as you cheapening women.
But how terrible that is to say that it's accidental. It's not. It's very, very finely cultivated. And it's a lifetime of habit that makes these things work. You can, and you get what was the film with She's All That, where you've got the perfect example in it, right? The dowdy girl who doesn't spend any time
Zac
with
Efron and the girl,
something like that. It was years ago.
The nerdy girl, yeah.
But you and there are many kinds of these stories, but where you've got and then she goes through the process of becoming, aware of her femininity, and she cultivates it, and suddenly she's beautiful, and all the guys like her, right? This sort of magical transformation. Well, that is not really real, as in, you can't just take a woman who has no feminine mystique, put her in makeup and high heels, and then assume she's going to have it. Because it's actually a lot more than merely the way that you dress. It's the way you conduct yourself, the way you incite expectations out of the men around you.
Well, that brings up the a feminist critique about beauty standards and stuff, because the beauty standards that we see in magazines and even on television and produced movies, they're very surface. It's very obviously the dowdy girl in those movies is always incredibly beautiful. She just happens to have her hair down and glasses on, but she's already incredibly beautiful. What can't be transmitted through a magazine is poise, is conduct, and is confidence. And the confidence that women look for, or that feminism wants to give to women, called empowerment, it doesn't seem completely rounded, because it's always like looking at, well, the feminist assumption about the patriarchy and women being victimhood. I don't think you can get to true confidence through victimhood. You can get to empowerment of a destructive sort, but that the most empowered women that I've ever met they don't need feminism.
No, they repudiate.
They understand it. They do fight for women's rights and against the subjection of women to different laws and stuff like that. But they don't need the ideological academic feminism because they exist as themselves.
Yeah, I mean, like. I've met many women, and recently through what we're doing at Lotus Eaters, because we're promoting a kind of intellectual conservatism, it has been attracting some very interesting ladies who want to talk to us, because they are very aware of the kind of magic spell that women cast. And, there used to be schools and manuals, and, for women, how to be a proper woman, stand in a certain way, act in a certain way, conduct yourself in a certain way, practice these things, and men will do anything you want. You are basically invulnerable.
Men were also trained during this era. Men were also finished as well. It wasn't just one-sided.
Yeah, of course. How to be a gentleman, obviously. But these things, I think, are still embedded within the male psyche. If a woman were to act in these ways towards men, I think young men would fall in line very, very quickly if they wanted to bring this back. And so there are some women, like you said, a sort of cultural vanguard of conservative women who are like, hang on a second, the feminists have stolen something from us. They've stolen this magical ability to command the world around us through merely the way we engage and speak and hold ourselves. Whatever state of affairs was present and obtained during their sort of grandmother's generation has been stolen. It was a skill, it was an ability, and young women have been deprived of this, and they don't even know that there's something missing a lot of the time. I think that's the saddest part about this. And I'm not saying that I can do anything to help them get it back, but good luck to those women who are trying to recover it. Because I think there's something there.
So Lotus Eaters, is it fair to say it's kind of a boys' club?
Well, I mean, we've got 2 women on staff.
Okay. All right.
So they're just not in front of the camera. That's not because we wouldn't have a woman in front of the camera, obviously. We just have to hire on merit. But very few women actually want the job of presenting. But no, there are, we've got 2 women in the office, and they definitely are good to have there as a moderating force, because otherwise it would be a very boyish boys' club.
Okay.
But no, we very much appreciate the fact that they're there, because women change the dynamic of an environment. If it's an all male, and any man knows this, as soon as a single woman steps in the room, things change, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's completely normal, healthy, totally human. So no, I wouldn't call it a boys' club. And we have lots of female guests as well, because like I said, there are a lot of women who are like, hang on a second, this was all a big mistake. And there's some romance has been stripped away from us here, and we need to bring that back.
Well, romance, on one level, I think it's dual. At one level, liberalism, or that universal mindset, stripped the reality and the sanctity of the mother-child dyad and the need for care at the beginning and end of life. It focused purely on the will and consent and all these assumptions that assume that you are already born in a culture and raised enough to be rational. Before you're rational, you have to be born and then taught to be rational, right? And the whole rational subject completely cuts that out. And that power of the woman is kind of just ignored. And then when she's put on the marketplace, or when she's compared to men within the marketplace, she's always going to come up second, because her, according to Ivan Illich, the marketplace will always reward the men, because the men are just more engaged with the type of work that the marketplace finds valuable, like largely speaking, and women's work is just not valued, or just assumed to be valued. And feminists do have, I think they have a very valid critique about what they call emotional labor or unpaid labor. I don't think that the state should intercede on that, but if we don't recognize that as inherently valuable to all of civilization, then I don't know how we're going to right the valid grievance that women have about just kind of being used by society to produce, and then, they can never earn as much as a man and fulfill their destiny as a mother at the same time.
It used to be that there was a social institution that would compensate women for this emotional labor on an individual basis. One man would compensate her for a very long time in exchange for this emotional labor that she did. Maybe that would be a place to start. Call me an old traditionalist.
I'm just saying, the values of men and the values of women, or values for men, values for women, values for society, marriage, romance, mystique, all of that was encapsulated, better or worse depending on the religion, but within religion. And by religion, I mean a network of stories and values, proverbs, psalms, and practices that synced together communities and then individual families within those communities. The market, or our modern society, it's shattered and put all these different things into different areas, and I don't see how we communicate this to the next generation without some sort of story, without some sort of religion.
Well, you're absolutely right about the story. I think is the most important thing. I think this is probably the worst thing that postmodernism did to us, was reject that there could be meaningful stories. This is not good. This is a terrible thing.
Did they reject meaningful stories, or did they reduce all stories to morality tales about power? Did they just reduce all stories to one?
I think that's a way of saying the same thing. A meaningful story is one that contains a moral lesson within it, and also explains how things came to be. And the postmodernists, as you say, reduced everything to immediate stories about power narratives, rejecting the overarching meta-narratives of our civilization. And so the stories of how we came to be and the moral justification that underpinned them evaporated. And I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. I think that, I mean, actually, I find that Aristotle is the most relevant critique of modern life at the moment. No, a story is a representation of reality. You know, when we're telling a story, representing reality for good and ill, you know, with the moral lessons that are contained within. And this is why we learn and why we love watching fiction, because we are seeing a hypothetical reality and the logical consequences that follow from the decisions made within the environment that's presented to us. And we learn from that about the human condition. So the storyteller isn't just a liar, as Plato thought. The storyteller is actually a philosopher of human nature. And they're telling us about what it is to be human from their own experiences, but they're then presenting to us in a way we can understand for the future. And this, I think, I mean, I don't have like an answer really. I completely agree with you. Your critique is totally salient. That what religion did was it gave us these overarching stories that informed how we need to live. And I don't think we can just go back. I don't think there's ever a going back. We can only move forward. And I do think that we're in a position now where people wouldn't authentically believe the religion. If you're not genuinely in it, then you've got a kind of second order. Well, I'd like the benefits of it, so I'll pretend. I don't think that's authentic. I don't think that really grips the heart and souls of people. So, and I'm not saying I know what could either. I'm not saying I've got the answer, but I think we've at least diagnosed the problem.
Yeah. Well, one kind of silver lining to the encroachment of woke into, let's just say, Hollywood is that they are incapable of telling good stories. Like inevitably the propaganda kind of rats itself out. And so there's something about human beings' ability to tell truth through stories by liking or disliking the story, by loving or disloving the story, by being taken into it or rejected by the story. There's something that is an aesthetic litmus test on the reality of a morality when it is distilled and then transmitted through stories. So it might be the case that religion comes back by just stochastically or just people keep on telling stories, and eventually a network of stories re-announces itself that does have room in it for us to live out our lives in concert with each other and find a lot of value in them.
I mean, I hope so. I think you're completely right about that. I had a guest on, a lady called Mega Verma, who is an arts critic and artist. You can find her on Twitter. She was a really great guest, and she's one of these young women who are like, "Well, hang on a second, my femininity is important. This essential magical womanhood is an important thing to me." And she, being an art critic, she had a very, very pithy way of putting this. She was saying, "Look, art is concentrated truth. You know, there's a good artist. There's a truth that is very, very, very tightly concentrated and hits you like a bullet. You know, it goes straight into your heart, and that's why you're enchanted with it. You can't help but be." And you are right. Hollywood, obviously, there are no artists left in Hollywood. There are merely like Jobsworths who are, you know, professional lighting people, script writers, but they're not storytellers. They're not artists. They don't have a magic or a passion, and they can't enchant you anymore. So all they can, and you notice, you can tell this by the fact they never make anything new. Like we went through this the other day on a podcast. In I think it was 2020, 53% of all of the movies that had been made were just sequels. You know, and these were just the ones I could identify directly as being sequels, let alone, you know, remakes and just the same story that's been recycled with new characters, stuff like this, you know. And we'd never heard of the new films that come out. Why? Because no one cared about them. No one cared, you know. They weren't interesting. No one wanted to watch them. And the only thing that anyone, the latest film that was really a real surprise was the Sonic the Hedgehog one and Top Gun. Right, of all things, for them to be the big films in the last couple of years, and then Joker in 2019, I suppose, but that was more a sort of cultural critique. But Sonic the Hedgehog and Top Gun, like if you ask me 5 years ago, what do I think the big films will be? I would never have predicted, right?
Yeah.
But my son loved the Sonic the Hedgehog, and a load of my friends loved that Top Gun film. And I didn't even really like the original Top Gun, but I might go and see it just to see what all the fuss is about.
Yeah.
But these are actual, proper stories being told, whether you like them or not. And you are right. Like, it's so embarrassing for Hollywood at this point. They churn out the same trash every year.
Yeah.
So who cares?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of a silver lining, just like Disney. Like, people, I guess there's people who are in that cult of Disney, and they're adults that go to Disney. It's part of their whole worldview. I guess they can find a very virtuous or meaningful life within the Disney worldview. Now, to what extent we need to obey Disney and all of its slide into what decadence and stuff is an open question. Where people will reject that based on the quality of the tales that it's using to promote the quality of its character, right? I think
Disney's
they go hand
defense, they used to do an amazing job of this enchantment. They look at the women they used to portray on the screen. They used to have, this is why Frozen was such a big deal, because they're very feminine women in Frozen. They're very in command of their femininity. Like Elsa is very, womanly. She's got the sort of self-possession that one would expect. And I had to watch, was it Encanto the other day? And the character is the total opposite. It's like the Californian sort of just constantly talking female character, where she's explaining every single little thing that's happening to her, and there's no mystique. There's it's just formless, and so you can see that there's a huge difference in writing styles, and then you go back to Snow White and the original Disney, even like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. My wife loves all of these old Disney films. She loves these so much. These are a huge part of her childhood and what it meant to be a woman growing up. And where is it now? It's very, very few and far between, it seems.
Well, it's still on Disney Plus. You just have to click through a few features, to get to it.
But I mean, obviously. But like the new ones, the things get advertised, things that get attention. Yeah. It's a different world. And you are right. They are degenerating, which is good.
With regard to Lotus Eaters, where are you guys headed? So when did you start that? Again, that was 3 years ago, you guys? Or
it was a year and a half, 2 years ago. In fact, I think we've just moved into our second year.
Excellent.
So September. So this September, I think, will be our second anniversary.
Okay. And so where are you guys headed? What have you done, and where are you headed?
Right. So we're kind of heading into uncharted waters. Basically, it is a philosophical project that is trying to understand why things have gone so wrong, which is one of the reasons I can talk about it so fluidly, just off the cuff, because we spend our days discussing this in the office and making content about what we've discovered.
And how do you guys end up not being completely cynical nihilists?
That's a great question.
The British dry humor, or?
There is definitely a lot of dry humor. Definitely a lot of dry humor. But we're generally quite optimistic people. Everyone there is unbelievably intelligent and really knows their stuff. And I'm very lucky to have been able to sort of bring about a team of very deep thinkers and people who know what they're trying to achieve. And so my part of it, I've been studying aesthetics recently, and I think that conservatives need to start focusing on aesthetics. Thing like we were talking about with like the enchantment of womanhood. This is an aesthetic effect. It's not something you can measure, but it's something everyone can feel, and it happens in our heads. It's not something that happens, outside of our heads. It's a social thing that happens when we are in one another's company. It's part of the human experience. And I think conservatives, following the sort of Roger Scruton mold, need to start thinking about that. So, okay, what do I want to feel about my own society? Because at the moment, I don't know how it is in America at the moment, but in Britain, there are a lot of people who feel very disconnected from wider society. They feel alienated in their own communities because mass immigration here is unbelievable. It's got to the point where the Conservatives appear to be afraid to release the latest census because in 2011 it was something like 1 in 5 people in England was a foreigner, and it's probably going to be a lot more than that now. Probably going to be about 1 in 4, if not more people.
Well, one benefit is that eventually you guys will start doing land acknowledgements for the British, because nobody will remember whose land they're standing.
Possibly we'll get ancestral tribal lands. Honestly, it's so strange walking down the high street in my city, because I live in a place called Swindon, which is not prestigious, right? It's not a prestigious place, and that's actually one of the reasons I liked it. It was humble, it was homely, and I would walk down the street. Literally 5 years ago, I'd walk down the street and I'd bump into 2 or 3 people I'd known, because I've lived here for over 20 years now, and so I'd bump into 2 or 3 people I'd known, have a quick chat with them, carry on, and it was just Swindoners, people who was just local to the area and whose families have been here for quite some time, but for some reason, the Conservative government have decided what they're going to do is ratchet up the amount of immigration they bring in. So it used to be we'd have about 600,000 new people in a year. And the Conservatives are like, yeah, but what about if we had 1.16 million last year? And England's a very old and very tiny and very, very densely populated place. And so America has 1 million legal immigrants in a year at least. And for us to match that is insane. And so you can see the effect in the streets. And
was this in response to some sort of economic worry about Brexit or something?
No, the Brexit was underpinned by a desire to reduce immigration by many people. The Brexiteers, they were polled about this actually shortly after the Brexit vote by Lord Ashcroft. He's got his own polling company, and the Brexiteers, their primary concern was sovereignty. Obviously, they wanted Britain to have British decisions made in our country, which is not unreasonable. But the second one was immigration. They were very concerned about immigration. And so it's very strange that Boris Johnson, the Get Brexit Done guy, seems to have failed to understand that was of serious concern and just has ramped up the number of immigrants. I can only assume that for some reason this is good for the GDP or something like that. But honestly, I walk down the street now and it's just really strange that you see people from all over the world. It's not like any one race. That's the thing. If it was one people who were coming in, you could at least learn their language, learn their culture, learn their customs. You could start to interface with them and grow a bond between them. You could understand what they were saying. But if it's some French guy from North Africa, like who speaks French, and I mean, the other day I was walking through Swindon town centre, and I saw 3 separate groups of North African migrants, obviously recent arrivals, all speaking in French. I was like, why wouldn't you go to the French version of Swindon if you were going to go anywhere? Like, why would you come to here? Like, of all places. And then, and again, there are obviously fewer Middle Easterners, actually, more sort of Indian subcontinent people, so Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, but then you've got lots of Eastern Europeans. Like you'll see, like groups of Eastern Europeans. You can tell that they're Eastern Europeans just by looking at them. Frankly, they look different, but then they sound different. So they're walking along, jabbering away in some foreign language, and you're just like, "Where the hell am I?" And then you've got like people from like Senegal and stuff like that who you can tell come from some far place down very south in Africa, and it's just like you've got. I mean, diversity is definitely the name of the game, but it's like I didn't move anywhere, and now I feel like I've never been here. All of these strange people who've literally within the last year or two turned up, and at the moment we're currently going through a housing crisis. It's there aren't enough houses. Well, yeah, no kidding. What did you expect was going to happen? You let 1 million extra people in, and it's 500,000 normally every year, and now it's 1 million, and everyone's like, "Oh god, the house prices have gone through the roof."
I think it could be very tempting to blame it on some sort of globalist conspiracy to kind of just bleed out British liberals.
I don't think it's conspiracy. I think it's that our government are incompetent and afraid of the media, because they know that if they turn around and do a Trump and say, well, we're just going to close the borders, we're just not going to have it, the media will freak out. because the assumption that underlies it.
Why does the media wag the dog?
Because the Conservatives are cowards, and the weird thing
You
about
give
the
them a
Conservatives,
mile, they take an inch.
it's worse than that, frankly. But the problem with the Conservatives, they're very bad at formulating a moral argument in favor of what they want to do, which is weird because the things that they actually want to do are very popular with the public. Like very, because we're a very conservative country, and for some reason we're being the dog is being wagged by a very left wing media, and the Conservatives who, I mean, you can't understand the scope of Boris Johnson's victory in 2019 if you're not in Britain. Like, he smashed the Labour Party, he smashed them, he got a phenomenal absolute majority in the Parliament, and the British Parliament is totally sovereign. There are no limits to what the British Parliament can actually legislate. This was established in the Civil War, and so Boris Johnson could do anything he wanted. He could just sit there like Tony Blair did when he got into power, just sat there legislating day after day. Just, no, we're doing this, because having the majority of the Parliament meant he could rubber stamp anything, and yet he's done virtually nothing.
And so, this is why I gravitate more towards right thinking. The Yarvin, Aaron McIntyre. It's just that there's this organism that's actually controlling things. It's neoliberal. It's globalist. It's ideological. It's using Marxism for its own ends. It just wants power. It's just creating power, and it doesn't matter what kind of conservative or anti-establishment figures we throw up there. There's no way that a Trump's going to smash through that. There's no way that maybe in the same thing with your country. They are all these politicians. It's window dressing for something that is inevitable. It's like this Thanos blind entity.
It's so peculiar, isn't it? Like I mean, the power that the Conservatives currently wield, and they can't even stop illegal immigrants crossing the channel in dinghies. And they go, oh, well, we've got lefty human rights lawyers who are using the Human Rights Act of 1998 to stop our attempt to deport them. It's like, well, then repeal the Human Rights Act of 1998 and replace it with something that doesn't allow them to do it. I mean, it was in your manifesto in 2018 that they said, we're going to look at this and maybe change this. Okay, now you have unlimited power to do so. Why didn't you do that on day one? What is wrong with you? What's stopping you? And I can only assume it's fear of the media, I think, because the media will say, oh, you're racist, and they should just be like Donald Trump, be like, I don't care what you think, shut up, communists. I'm not going to have you. We're going to make Britain great again. That should have been what Boris was like, and that's what they all were afraid he was going to be like, and he wasn't anything like it. So that's very disappointing.
So weird. We're at such a weird intersection of times.
And the victory lies there as well. Like, the victory lies there. People want that. And I think the polls, it's not like there's not polling that shows that the public want less immigration, want the illegal immigrants sorted. They don't want like all of these problems that we're having that are caused by all of these sort of innovations that were brought in by the last Labour government. They don't actually want these things. Like, the Labour government brought in devolved parliaments. And okay, that sounds... Sorry?
Devolve
Parlementa. That's exactly it. It's a very French idea, exactly. But this is the point. We'll give the Welsh the Assembly. We'll give the Scots a national parliament. It's like, well, what do you think is going to happen in them? Oh, they turned into hotbeds of secession. What a shock! And so in 2014, the Scots were like, right, we've finally got the votes. We're gonna have a Scottish referendum on whether we leave the UK, and they voted to stay in. So it's just like, okay, well, now what? And so the Scottish National Party are continuing on, well, we're going to have another referendum. To what end? What's the point? Boris, abolish them. They don't need them. They're just secessionist, movements that form in these parliaments. If you're the government, the one nation Conservatives, you get rid of the devolved parliaments because they're not in any way conducive to the health of the country you are currently in command of. Yeah. But they do nothing. And it's so bizarre. He could do it tomorrow. The Supreme Court, right? Britain, historically, has never had a Supreme Court. Has high courts. The high courts are...
they arbitrate the law, then? They interpret the law?
They do arbitrate the law in the name of the king or the queen, in our case at the moment. And so this is all we've ever had. But the Americans, you guys, decided, well, you can have a Supreme Court, which is fine, but that's a political organ. It's a political entity. And that. That's fine. And that's taking
Well, I mean, I don't
account.
want them shot or assassinated as political authorities. But
Well, I mean, Kavanaugh nearly got it, didn't he? But the point is, it's expressly a political entity. It's a check and balance in your government, right?
yeah,
Because you have a separation of powers. But we don't have that. We're a constitutional monarchy where the head of state is also the head of the church and head of the courts. We are an evolved country.
Elizabeth can just say, I don't like the way that this law was interpreted. We're going to switch around this word here.
The law flows from the king.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing. The authority of the common law flows from the king. And the point of the common law was that it put the king on the side of the common man against the institutions. That was the point of it. And so we're not the same as America. And so when Tony Blair, again, the Labour government, were like, oh, we're gonna give us a Supreme Court. Why? We've never needed one before. Why would we need one now? And so in 2009, we got a Supreme Court. I mean, I've got T-shirts that are older than our Supreme Court. Like this came about in 2009. And so obviously...
But was it tacked on or given a bunch of authority?
It was given a bunch of... Well, that was the question. So we're going to have a Supreme Court. It's like, okay, but we've never needed one. Where does it fit in? Well, assume it's above the high courts. It's like, okay, maybe. Why do we need that? And it didn't really do that much until the Brexit referendum. And then the Supreme Court tried to intervene to overturn the Brexit referendum.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's like, oh, well, that went down really well, didn't it? Boris, the get Brexit done guy, get rid of it. Just get rid of it. It's a politicized entity that we never needed in advance and has been in literally a foreign sort of Frankenstein's monster stitched on to our ancient system.
Because it's expedient for certain political wills.
Exactly. And as a conservative, you would think, well, it would be expedient for our conservative will to get rid of this. And yet they do nothing. And so it's unbelievably frustrating to be living at this moment in Britain where the Conservatives can do everything. And you know that if you were sat in a bar talking to them, they would say, oh, yeah, we should probably do that. And yet they do nothing.
Is it just because of weakness? You say incompetence, but that can only cover so much.
I think it's weakness and incompetence. Boris is definitely incompetent and he is definitely weak. And the entire party seems riddled with it. The problem with the Conservative Party is it's like 180 years old. So it's older than a lot of countries. And so it's a very venerable institution in and of itself. And so the party itself has like an internal structure that means that there are avenues of resistance to any kind of change, even if the course we're on at the moment is totally detrimental to conservative interests. So it's very complicated. I'm not going to say I pretend to know how it works internally either, because I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. So I'm not going to say I know how it works, but you can see this from the outside. And it's just really infuriating. And there appears to be very little we can do. The Conservatives are basically left-wing in this country. And they really are. It's the old joke of, they're just progressive driving the speed limit. Very much. Yeah.
And so you're tempted to go reactionary or not. You're constantly, I don't want to be don't make me a conservative. Don't make me right wing. I don't want to do it. But if I look really closely at where I am and where we're headed, we need some sort of opposition. Even if you don't want to embody that, you still want to bring it at least to the liberals' attention that this is some classical liberals. This is some very deep flaws, and we're going to either secede to Marxism or just be overrun by incompetence unless we get some sort of values.
No, you
steal ourselves.
Nail on the head. It's one of those things where we've come to the fork in the road where little other choice is available to us. And it's not that I want to be a reactionary. If I did, I'd just say, I've met many of these neo-reactionary types, and they're nice. They're often very philosophical and very thoughtful. It's not that I think there's anything bad about it. It's that I don't think that we can turn back the clock. So what I think needs to happen is a synthesis between these conservative values and liberalism as an ideology. And this is why I'm attacking the false assumptions in liberalism. Because look, we have to replace these with something that doesn't enable communists to subvert our civilizations.
And I think that you're onto something intuitively about studying aesthetics and being aware that aesthetic is going to be a bridge that will tie the stories together, tie these values together.
And I think framing it in terms of story, the critical race theorists are very cognizant of this, that values are transmitted through stories. They're very, very aware of this. And this is why you see
testimonials. Lived experience.
They're a form of story. I mean, one of the I can't remember which essay it is now, but in the big Bible of critical race theory that Kimberly Crenshaw put together, one of them is explicit about, like, look, we're going to flood the airwaves with our stories because this is what persuades people, and this is what helps them understand our perspective on the world. It's like, okay, well, there we go. So I really think the aesthetic question is one that we need to answer, and this ties with conservatism, because it's, okay, what do we want to see around us that will make us feel a certain way, right? And what you want is to have people people you love, a countryside that you like. You don't want to wake up in a giant brutalist hellscape nightmare where it's just, tenements as far as the eye can see, filled with people gibbering all kinds of different languages, like the Tower of Babel, that you can't recognize, you can't understand, you can't have any human sentiment for. They're just strangers who arrived yesterday and might be gone tomorrow. You don't want that. What you want is a place where you can have lasting connections with neighbors you like, and you can, say good morning to, where you wake up with your kids and your wife, and you go to your job, and things are comforting. They make you feel in a certain way. This is the aesthetic of the world that the conservatives really need to start talking about. And you can see a lot of the younger guys online posting memes about, the little frog who's just like, men only want one thing, and it's a wife and kids, and you can, and that's the thing that we need to be able to really hit on and argue for in a way that steps outside of the framework of the left, because as any military historian will tell you, battles are won when you choose the field. If you fight on the enemy's field, you're going to lose, because they chose it for a reason, because they had all the advantages there. So you need to go outside of the experience of the enemy and fight them on ground they're not familiar with. And thankfully, the good life, the aesthetics is actually something they're not good at. In fact, I mean, look at like it's another meme where it's like the beautiful young girl goes to university and cuts her hair, pierces her face, gets a bunch of tattoos, dies. It looks disgusting. It's like, there's something wrong with that. Right?
No, they're anti-aesthetic. The postmodern aesthetic is anti-aesthetic. Exactly.
And so the right wing, the conservatives, need to take what is good from liberalism and synthesize it through the form of the aesthetic that they are trying to project as a story, an aspirational story to young people. And it has to appeal to both men and women. It has to be together. You can have something beautiful.
Yeah. There's one more question. Mm-hmm. At the end of your conversation with Aaron McIntyre, you complimented him and the other neo-reactionary or NRX people for not using categorical language of the left, and I didn't quite understand what you meant. You said that they were describing or arguing in a way that was avoiding a pitfall. And was that categorical language, was that about relying on identity categories? Is that what you meant by that?
Yeah. So the categorical language is things like, white, black, male, female. They are speaking in the thick concepts. So they speak of men and women, right? They speak of Americans or Englishmen or Frenchmen or Senegalese or whatever.
With polyvalence or things that have different meanings.
The thick concepts of these things, where it's got a descriptive, prescriptive, and sort of aesthetic quality to it. Yeah. And so they're very clever to speak outside of the language of the left, and it's very human. It's very human language, and it touches the kind of like lizard sentiment in the back of the skull, where they can speak of moral concepts as they're describing a thing and say, well, look, this is a great betrayal or deceit that's being foisted upon us by the ruling class. And you'd only do that if you hated the people you were dealing with. And then when you look at the Democrats, well, they look like a bunch of people who really hate the average person, but you look at Trump, and Trump had a great way of tapping into this kind of champion of the people vibe, because he was an American first and foremost, Trump is, if nothing else, he's a goddamn American. And that's a particular thing in a particular time, in a particular place, and it looks a particular way.
Yeah.
It's not just an abstract categorical. Not everyone is American. It's a very exclusive thing. But anyone with white skin is white. So it's the NRX are very good at speaking in this very human language, and they should. Conservatives should learn from that. That's definitely something they should do.
So do you have anything to plug? Are you guys doing a Lotus Eaters tour? You guys got like a light show, like a Pink Floyd style light show, with lasers and mushrooms and a little rave happening?
Not yet. We should do something like that, I think.
Like a banquet, maybe?
We aren't at the stage where we want to yet, I think. We're still building the foundation, still building the house. But I think it's going very well. We're actually looking to upgrade the studio in the next few months.
Oh, okay.
So we will have 2 studios, hopefully, and
for recording or broadcasting.
For broadcasting, and it'll be bigger, so we'll have more people on camera at once. That'll be very exciting. But this is a few months off yet. But
and is it all online? Are you guys publishing books, doing like films or something like that? A little bit more concentrated media content.
It depends on whether we can expand. So we don't do any advertising, so that obviously does. We don't do adverts on the podcast. So it's, the Daily Wire will be like, blah, blah, blah. And now a word from our sponsors. We don't have sponsors, and I don't want sponsors either. So that does limit our growth potential, unfortunately, because obviously we can make 3 times the money if we did do that. But I've never done adverts, and I think it would be vaguely wrong in some way to do adverts. I really like the fact that we're totally independent. Again, like no one has these strings on us. And so people, for £5 a month, subscribe to the website, get access to all of the content that we put up there. And that's how everything is paid for, basically. And so it's a slower process, but it seems to have deeper roots, and it's more reliable, frankly. It keeps us focused on the mission, and we don't have to have, it's a bit sordid doing adverts when we're trying to do what we're doing. And so thankfully we don't have to do that.
So you guys don't have a What is a Woman or a Gina Carano movie coming down the pipes?
Not yet. The Daily Wire have had a few years advance on us, but I do expect us to start doing things like we're currently hiring at the moment, actually. So if anyone's interested, go to lotuseaters.com/careers to see what we've got available. So we are currently hiring, but it'll be in a few years' time when we've got a really solid foundation that will be able to do that. But we're doing, I think, pretty well at the moment, and I'm very happy with the content we're producing. I'm very happy with the team itself, and it seems to be all going fairly well. Dare I say it?
Well, at the risk of being perceived of blowing smoke in your direction, there was this interesting. I think it was from the right wing Twitter erupted in praise about you. So they said Sargon's the one guy that made it out of Gamergate. He's the one guy who survived Gamergate and actually built something. So
I put it down to not being on the internet all the time. Believe it or not, I'm not actually very online because obviously I've got a family and I've got business.
You got sword fighting to do.
Yeah, exactly. I've got real people to deal with, and it seems that a lot of the people from Gamegate who self-destructed have done so because they're just on the internet all the time. And honestly, I feel sorry for quite a few of them now, actually, which is, and I don't mean to be condescending. I'm just like, come on, you can do better, surely,
Well, it's the internet. It's really easy to buy into the icon that people are buying into. It's really easy to do that.
And it's good to escape that as well.
Yeah. Well, Carl, I'm going to end the recording. Thank you so much for your time. Great to catch up with you. Our third time.
Oh, I had a wonderful time. I always enjoyed these conversations because you have a way of drawing out the best in people, I've noticed, in your conversations. You've got a very understated interview style that I think is not as widely recognized as it should be.
Well, all in good time. All in good time.